So here we have an array of integers with 2 elements. Now, if you want to iterate over this array and print each element, the simplest solution is to use a range-based for loop. So let's quickly recap. We type for int number in numbers. Then we print the number followed by an endo. Okay? So in each iteration, our loop variable is going to hold one of the values in this array, like 10 or 20. It's not going to be an index. It's going to be an actual value. Now over here, we can also use the auto keyword and let the compiler infer the type of this variable, in this case, int. Either way works. Now, there are situations where we cannot use a range-based for loop for iterating over an array. Sometimes we need to use an index to access individual elements. Examples are when we need to copy or compare arrays. We'll look at these examples in the next lesson. So let's see how we can use a for loop to iterate over this array. We declare our loop variable, which is going to be an index. Now, here we need to know the size of the array. But as I told you before, we don't want to hard code the size, because if tomorrow we decide to come back and add a new element in this array, we have to remember to come back and change the size here. So we want to calculate the size dynamically. Now, earlier we talked about the size of operator. If we pass our numbers array here, this will return the number of bytes allocated to this array. So here we have 3 integers, and each integer on my machine is 4 bytes long. So 3 times 4 is going to be 12. That is the value returned by this expression. So if we take that and divide it by the size of each integer, we can figure out the number of elements in this array, okay? Then we do I++, and finally we print numbers of I followed by endo. Let's run our program and make sure it works. There you go, beautiful. Now, in this lesson, I want to show you a simpler way to calculate the size of an array. In C++ standard library, we have a function called size. So instead of using the size of operator, we're using the size function. Look at the icon. Here we see an F. That means this is a function. This function is defined in the std namespace. So if you haven't included the namespace on the top, to access this, you have to qualify it with std, okay? Now here we don't need to do this. Now we can simply pass our array, and this will return 3. So if we run our program, we get the same result as before. So using the size function is the preferred way to get the size of arrays, but I showed you the other approach because that's something you see in a lot of code bases, especially the older ones.